In the year 2021, a 46-year-old man named Mr. A, residing in an apartment in Hwaseong City, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea, was employed as a staff member at a partner company of a major corporation. To understand his family situation a bit, in the past, while running a Japanese restaurant in Suwon, he met and married Mrs. B, who was 9 years his junior. In 2014, their son was born, forming a harmonious new family. Mr. A was a diligent family man who worked tirelessly day and night to support his family. Even after returning home from work, he undertook delivery jobs in the evenings and on weekends, earning approximately 4 million Korean won each month, approximately $3,000. His wife also ran a workshop nearby, where she made natural soaps and lotions, and it was operated well enough to be featured in a local newsletter. She was skilled, holding as many as 20 certifications related to her craft. Thanks to this industrious lifestyle, acquaintances referred to them as a couple who managed their household exceptionally well, offering praise without reservation. Then, on the morning of May 26, 2021, at 6 o'clock, Mr. A was busily preparing to go to work, as usual. "Honey, I am running a bit late, so I will head out right away," he said. To her husband, who was in a rush to leave, Mrs. B quickly handed over a drink made by mixing misugaru, a traditional Korean grain powder, with honey and milk, along with a hamburger. He hurriedly consumed this while leaving the house. About 30 minutes after he arrived at his company, perhaps, he started feeling unwell. He experienced sharp pains in his chest and lower abdomen, similar to severe indigestion. He recalled that the honey had passed its expiration date and wondered if it had gone bad. He visited the restroom 5 times and eventually vomited. He vomited so much there was nothing left to expel. The husband, having regained his senses for a moment, calls his wife. Imagine his situation now. The wife's reaction is indifferent. Following his wife's advice, Mr. A buys some digestive medicine on his way home from work in the evening. Until then, he still feels unwell and ends up skipping dinner. Around 8 in the evening, he starts to feel a bit better and eats half a bowl of plain porridge that his wife had prepared for him. That is all he can manage. However, about 2 hours later, at 10 at night, the abdominal pain strikes again. This time, it is more severe than before, and he breaks out in a cold sweat. He tells his wife, "Honey, I cannot endure this. Please call 119, which is the emergency services number in South Korea, similar to 911 in the United States." Shortly after, he arrives at the emergency room, where he vomits several times. It is only after receiving intravenous fluids and painkillers that he feels like he might survive. At 1:30 in the early morning of the 27th, Mr. A returns home with his wife and son. At that time, his wife had also accompanied him to the emergency room and was exhausted. Nonetheless, before her husband falls asleep, she gives him a glass of cold water and then soon falls asleep herself. However, the next morning at 7:20, when the wife wakes up, she finds the state of the house is a mess. She could not sleep because there was no place to rest between the living room and the shoe cabinet. The wife was unable to sleep. Despite her sleeplessness, something alarming caught her attention. The main entrance was ajar, and the separated recyclable trash was all toppled over. What happened? As she was startled, her eyes landed on her husband collapsed at the entrance. He was lying face down, wearing only an undershirt. Concerned, the wife said, "Honey, what are you doing there? Come inside and sleep." She tried to shake him, but he showed no signs of movement. A strange feeling overcame her, and when she placed her hand near his nose, she felt nothing. She urgently called 119, the emergency services in South Korea. When the paramedics arrived, they found the wife sitting in the kitchen, weeping. After an examination, it was determined that the husband, Mr. A, had already passed away, with the estimated time of death being around 2:30 in the morning. It had been 5 hours since he died, leaving them unable to take any life-saving measures. Thus, the wife and son unexpectedly lost the head of their household overnight, leaving them in utter devastation. Shortly after, the funeral took place. and the wife's reaction was somewhat unexpected. Perhaps due to the sudden nature of his death, she appeared remarkably composed, to the point of seeming unemotional. Meanwhile, the police, having taken up the case, sensed that something was amiss. Mr. A had no known chronic illnesses and was generally in good health. When his wife passed away, he died just 1 day after suffering from an acute stomach condition. There was something suspicious about this. Thus, the police requested an autopsy from the bereaved family, and his wife readily agreed. 2 months later, the autopsy results were released, and they were shocking. The cause of A's death was not an acute stomach condition, but nicotine poisoning. His blood nicotine level was 2.4, far exceeding the lethal dose. It is said to be an amount equivalent to smoking 20 cigarettes at once. When such a level of nicotine enters the body, it causes muscle paralysis, arrhythmia, and eventually cardiac arrest. However, A had quit smoking right after his wife became pregnant with their son. He did not smoke at all in his daily life. Moreover, there were no injection marks or nicotine patches found on his body. Therefore, the only route of nicotine administration was through oral intake. In such cases, it causes severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and diarrhea, which are the symptoms A experienced before his death. Crucially, nicotine was detected in A's stomach alongside porridge and water. The police immediately reclassified the case as a murder and launched an investigation. The first step was to visit the victim's residence. However, the wife and son had already moved out. More precisely, they left the house just 10 days after the husband's death. The police tracked her down by asking around, and surprisingly, she was living with a new man. Ah, what kind of situation is this? It turns out that the wife, Ms. B, had been engaging in an affair since 2018, 3 years prior. She had continued a relationship with a man she met at a volunteer organization, and, surprisingly, since last year, they had been living together at the workshop she operated. They had already traveled abroad together on 3 occasions. It was revealed that even when her husband, Mr. A, was in the emergency room, she was continuously in contact with her lover. Astonishingly, she spent 3 days at the funeral home with her lover and accompanied him to the final Buddhist rites. As soon as the funeral was over, the two packed their belongings to move. However, they faced an unexpected problem. They needed a deposit of 10 million won, approximately $7,500 to secure a new home. Unfortunately, they were short on money. Thus, Ms. B resorted to using her deceased husband's name to take out a loan through a company. She exploited the fact that a death report had not yet been filed. From the police's perspective, since they had already moved and cleared everything out, conducting a search seemed pointless. They had no choice but to rely on photographs of the scene. Nevertheless, the police speculated that there might be evidence at the new residence of Ms. B, and their hunch was correct. They discovered liquid nicotine and electronic cigarettes that had been used. Upon investigation, it was found that Ms. B had purchased liquid nicotine worth 400,000 won, approximately $300, on 5 occasions between August 2020 and May 2021. The peculiar detail here was that she requested the staff to increase the nicotine concentration. This is illegal, although it is said to happen occasionally. An employee testifies that they added about 5 drops of the liquid. Now, nicotine. The victim died from nicotine, and there is evidence that the wife purchased nicotine. Therefore, the police immediately arrest her on suspicion of murder. However, she claims her innocence. Unbeknownst to the police, the husband was secretly smoking. She argues that she believes her husband took an extreme step. This claim is not entirely without credibility. In fact, smoking cessation medication was found in his car. If he had completely quit smoking, there would have been no need for such medication. Furthermore, the son also testified that he had witnessed his father secretly smoking. In addition to this, suspicious search records were found on A's phone, including terms like electronic cigarettes nicotine, and suicide insurance. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that A had made an extreme attempt 2 months prior. It seemed he was a diligent family man, but there appears to be more to the story that we do not know. Could it be that he suspected his wife's infidelity? Unlike the good couple that everyone praised, their reality was that they were on the brink of bankruptcy. A significant part of the reason for this was due to the wife's actions. Shortly after their marriage, the husband gave the wife full control over their finances. They had a debt of 87 million won, approximately 65,000 US dollars, from an apartment lease loan, and determined to pay it off as soon as possible. The husband lived on just 300,000 won, approximately 225 US dollars, a month for personal expenses. Then a problem arises. The wife becomes involved in a multi-level marketing scheme, purchasing goods and accumulating debt. Additionally, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic causes their workshop to fail in generating proper revenue. As a result, the couple is forced to take out additional loans. Unbeknownst to the husband, his wife B is having an affair, and she has been using her husband's salary to cover her lover's living and travel expenses. Despite the husband's hard work outside, it was like pouring water into a bottomless barrel. By April 2020, they could no longer pay for electricity or city gas. The interest on their loans increased, and their credit card payments were overdue. Unfortunately, the husband only becomes aware of this dire financial situation belatedly. At this point, he is still unaware of the affair. To manage the urgent financial crisis, he starts working night shifts to repay their debts. However, at some point, he reviews the statements and notices. Why is the debt not decreasing? On the contrary, the interest has increased. It turns out the wife had taken out an additional loan. This enrages the husband, and he demands to know where all the money is going. During this confrontation, he discovers her infidelity. He feels a profound sense of betrayal and contemplates divorce. Despite considering enduring the situation for their young son's sake, he struggles tremendously and eventually even attempts to take his own life. This is the precarious state of their relationship as explained by the wife, B. The police, upon hearing this, began to see things a bit differently. The husband, Mr. A, had an extraordinary love for his family. He was especially devoted to his son, whom he cherished even more as he had him at the late age of 39. He had given up alcohol and exercised daily, saying he would live healthily for a long time. However, the day Mr. A passed away was just 3 days before his son's birthday. Even as he was discharged from the emergency room that day, he talked about the birthday party with his son and apologized, saying, "I am sorry for being sick." Would someone like Mr. A, who was so dedicated to his family, really make such an extreme choice as his wife suggested? This led the police to suspect that the wife had committed murder for the insurance money. If her husband died, she could inherit the insurance payout, real estate, and savings, and live freely with her lover. However, the wife strongly objected to this accusation. The husband's life insurance? That was a policy his mother-in-law had taken out 8 years prior, and it clearly stated that the insurance money would not be paid in the event of an extreme choice. Moreover, the wife consistently insisted from the beginning that it was indeed an extreme choice made by her husband. She argued that she had agreed to the autopsy under that belief. Additionally, calculating the dates reveals that the police investigation began 2 months after her husband's death. During that time, she had not filed an insurance claim, so why would she have killed her husband for such purposes? In fact, bluntly speaking, in terms of financial gain, it would have been more beneficial for her husband to stay alive and continue earning regularly. Thus, the positions of the police and the wife were in stark opposition, and this conflict extended to the courtroom. Ultimately, after going through a remand and several appeals, a total of 5 trials were held. During the first trial, the prosecution sought a life sentence for the murder charge. Their argument was that the wife had injected nicotine into barley powder, white porridge, and cold water. Particularly on the morning before his death, A suffered from abdominal pain, diarrhea, and vomiting. These are typical symptoms of nicotine poisoning. However, the food and water he consumed that day were all given to him by his wife, B. Furthermore, his abdominal pain worsened again at 10 o'clock at night. Initially, the police hypothesized that she added nicotine to the misit garu, a traditional Korean grain powder mixed with water or milk, in the morning, but her husband did not die. Subsequently, when he returned home, she gave him white porridge, into which she allegedly added nicotine, causing his symptoms to deteriorate further. The police theorized that finally, before he went to sleep, she mixed nicotine into the cold water he drank, which led to his death. Additionally, regarding the argument against the possibility of suicide, there was evidence that A searched for information about indigestion caused by misut garu the day before his death. If he truly intended to die, there would have been no need for him to search about misut garu-induced indigestion, as he would have knowingly consumed nicotine. Moreover, no suicide note was found. Based on the torn curtains at the scene and the bruises remaining on his body, it seemed he experienced significant distress before his death. If it were indeed a case of suicide, would there not be nicotine found in the vicinity? There was none. From any perspective, the possibility seemed low. So, how did the defense attorney of B counter these claims? First, based on the nicotine found in the victim's body during the autopsy, the calculated amount was 137 grams. Considering the amount contained in liquid nicotine, this would mean ingesting between 56 to 150 bottles. Is it plausible that the wife could have secretly added such a large amount into the food? This claim itself suggests that it is not possible. Upon hearing it, it does seem somewhat plausible. Ultimately, the first trial court sided with the prosecution. They judged that the wife had murdered her husband by putting nicotine in his food and sentenced her to 30 years in prison. However, both the prosecution and Ms. B appealed on the grounds of unfair sentencing. The appeal trial took place in the year 2022, and the main issue here was how the nicotine was consumed. The prosecution argued that the nicotine was mixed into a traditional Korean grain powder drink known as misut garu, rice porridge, and water. However, there was a problem with this claim as well, as there was no decisive evidence to support it. The husband had gone to the emergency room that day. He drank water and died 1 hour later, according to the estimated timeline. Since nicotine was detected in the water found in his stomach, it was certain that he drank water mixed with nicotine. However, there is no evidence of nicotine in the misut garu he consumed in the morning, or the rice porridge he ate at 8 in the evening. But remember, he went to the emergency room after dinner. If he had had a blood test there, would the results not have been recorded? That is correct. However, unfortunately, it took 2 months for the autopsy results to be released. During that time, the period for storing blood samples at the hospital expired, and they were subsequently disposed of. This resulted in the loss of crucial evidence. The wife's defense attorney sharply focused on this point. There was no evidence of nicotine in the grain powder drink and the white porridge. Therefore, it was suggested that the abdominal pain and vomiting symptoms experienced that day could have been due to simple food poisoning. On the day of the incident, the husband consumed white porridge at 8 o'clock in the evening. 3 hours later, at 11 o'clock at night, he went to the emergency room. Typically, nicotine, when ingested, presents initial symptoms such as abdominal pain, vomiting, chills, increased blood pressure, and a rapid pulse within 15 minutes to an hour. However, after an hour, the symptoms change. The later symptoms include diarrhea, low blood pressure, arrhythmia, and muscle paralysis. These are considered late-stage symptoms. The emergency room doctor who treated Mr. A reported that his pulse was rapid, and his liver function and blood pressure were normal. Therefore, if, as the investigators claimed, there was nicotine in the white porridge, By the time Mr. A went to the emergency room 3 hours later, he should have had low blood pressure. However, instead, his pulse was rapid, supporting the argument that it could have been food poisoning. Ultimately, the court overturned the original ruling and dismissed the claim that nicotine was in the grain powder drink and white porridge. They only acknowledged that he was murdered by adding nicotine to water. This led to the sentence being reduced to 30 years in prison. Up until the second trial, the atmosphere was such that the murder charge was recognized. However, a dramatic turn of events occurred at the Supreme Court. The autopsy results of the husband, Mr. A, indicated the presence of nicotine at a lethal dose, but this only signified that level. The court judged that there was a possibility Mr. A could have made an extreme choice himself, and thus the case was sent back for retrial. Sometime later, the retrial followed. At this point, the defense submitted a photograph taken at the crime scene. In this photograph, there was a glass of water on Mr. A's desk. Upon examining it, it was seen that only about 1/3 of the water had been consumed. This suggests that he drank very little of the water given by his wife. Additionally, there was another glass that the prosecution submitted as evidence, purportedly belonging to the wife. The prosecution considered the wife's liquid nicotine to be a crucial piece of evidence. However, it was pointed out that the amount used was 10 milliliters, whereas the autopsy showed 137 grams. This discrepancy did not add up. In fact, a critical error on the part of the police was revealed. They were so focused on nicotine that they failed to compare other substances. Liquid nicotine does not contain only nicotine. If it had been ingested, other chemicals should have been present in the blood. Yet, the police overlooked this and did not conduct any experiments. As a result, the evidence supporting their initial claim regarding the use of liquid nicotine weakened. Furthermore, the actions of the wife immediately after the incident became a topic of discussion. She voluntarily reported to the police and emergency services, 119 being the emergency number in South Korea. Despite having ample time to destroy evidence, she did not remove the glass of water from her husband's desk. Furthermore, if this had been used in a crime, the liquid nicotine would have been disposed of, would it not? However, it was still in possession. Observing such behavior, it was concluded that it was difficult to view this as an intentional murder by poisoning. There is more to consider. Critically, it is nearly impossible for the wife to secretly administer such a large quantity of nicotine as was found in the body. This is because, unless it is pure nicotine, it emits a characteristic foul odor. Thus, it is said to be rather difficult to ingest unknowingly. Ultimately, the court acquitted the wife, B, of the murder charge. However, she was found guilty of identity theft for taking a loan in her husband's name. For this, she received a 1-year suspended sentence and 6 months of imprisonment. Although the case seems to have reached a conclusion, the origin of the nicotine that led to the victim's death and how it was consumed remain unresolved. This case likely left you with quite a headache as you listened. The legal battle was equally intense. In the end, the law determined that A had made an extreme choice. Did he leave his beloved family behind after taking the lives of his children? Many questions remain unanswered in this case. We're moving on to the second story, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the first one in the comments. It's important to me to see these events through your eyes. In the life of every young child, parents hold a special and important place. For their children, Mom and Dad are the center of the universe. They are the most beautiful, the wisest, the bravest, always ready to care and come to the rescue. There is nothing more horrifying than when these very parents, who should protect and safeguard their children, become their most terrifying abusers. Today, we will examine a very difficult case. We will discuss how 5-year-old Ashley Jao went missing and was later found. We will delve into what happened to her and how generational cycles of abuse within a family can lead to tragedy. On January 9, 2017, the Jackson, Ohio Police Department received a call from a concerned father. He said he needed help and that he couldn't find his daughter. Leng Zhao was unable to locate his 5-year-old daughter, whom he last saw around 4 p.m. in the back room of the family restaurant. Every day, they would put the girl down for a nap on a small couch, while the parents continued working, cooking, and serving customers. Ashley just vanished. Had someone snuck into the restaurant through the back entrance while her parents were busy? Or had the little girl wandered outside and gotten lost? No one could say for sure. The winter was harsh, with nighttime temperatures dropping to -10 degrees Celsius. It was urgent to find the child. The police and groups of volunteers launched a search. Many residents of the surrounding streets knew little Ashley in one way or another. She was often seen in the Chinese restaurant owned by her parents. The charming little girl would usually sit at one of the tables in the corner, diligently coloring with markers or watching cartoons on her tablet. Her older sister Jojo was already in school, and every day, Ashley eagerly awaited her return so they could play together. The neighbors sympathized deeply with the Zhao family, supporting the grieving parents in any way they could. No one could have imagined that the girl hadn't actually gone missing, that she had been there, in the restaurant, the entire time, and that her mother and father knew exactly where their daughter was. Ashley Jao was born on December 20th, 2011. Her father, Leng Zhao, was a U.S. citizen of Chinese descent, while her mother, Meng Meng, was a Chinese woman who had recently arrived in America and was in the process of legalizing her stay. She would later reveal that she had paid around $60,000 to be brought to the U.S., relying on the services of a criminal organization known as the Snakeheads. This Chinese mafia in the U.S. mainly deals in smuggling people across borders for money, of course. In China, Meng Meng had been an elementary school teacher. The couple met in a restaurant owned by Leng's sister, where Meng Meng worked as a waitress. Their romance was intense and developed rapidly. In March 2010, they got married, and by October, their first daughter, Jojo, was born. Liang's parents suggested that he and his wife take over one of the family-owned restaurants. It was located in Ohio and had previously been managed by Liang's father. The couple agreed, hoping that the move would mark a new chapter in their lives. However, everything became complicated when Meng Meng became pregnant with their second child. They knew that managing a restaurant with 2 small children would be incredibly difficult, especially since they couldn't afford to hire help for a business that was just beginning to grow. Liang asked his mother to come and help with the children, but she refused. She stated that she would help them, but only on her terms. She would look after Liang and Meng Meng's younger daughter, but only if they sent the girl to her in New York. The Zhao couple agreed, and Ashley was sent to her grandmother before she was even 2 years old. This allowed the couple to focus on their family restaurant and the upbringing of their older daughter, Jojo, who was the apple of their eye. When Ashley turned 4, she was returned to her parents. It was said that the girl had grown up enough, and that it would now be easier to care for her. Then, on January 9, 2017, at around 9 p.m., a call came into the police. The caller, Liang Zhao, said he couldn't find his youngest daughter anywhere. The officer who took the call reasonably asked why the parents were only now becoming concerned if the last time the girl was seen was around 5 p.m. Liang explained that there were no other employees in the restaurant besides him and his wife, so they simply didn't have the time to check whether their child was still there. Police officers searched the area around the restaurant, checking every store on the street where the Chinese eatery was located. Where could 5-year-old Ashley have gone? They searched the nearby wooded areas and questioned everyone they encountered on the street, asking if anyone had seen a little girl. But it was as if Ashley had vanished into thin air. There were no clues, no witnesses. 75 police officers spent the entire night on their feet, scouring the area with service dogs and using drones to survey the territory. They found nothing. The next morning, the FBI joined the search. Roads leading in and out of the city were blocked. Flyers with information about the missing girl were handed out to all drivers. The strangest part was that Ashley's parents did not participate in the search. They continued working in the restaurant as if they weren't the ones who had lost a child. But by the next day, the investigation came to a conclusion when Ashley Jao was found in her parents' restaurant. Naturally, the investigators were deeply disturbed by the behavior of Ashley's parents. Liang and Meng Meng seemed to be going out of their way to pretend that nothing had happened. On the morning of January 10th, they opened the restaurant as usual and started serving customers. The police immediately intervened, understanding that if the girl had been abducted while she was sleeping, there might still be evidence inside the restaurant. The restaurant could very well have been a crime scene, and under no circumstances should anyone have been allowed inside. But before they could conduct a full-scale search, the father of the family confessed everything. He led the police officers to a small crack in the walk-in refrigerator, which was a separate room kept at a low temperature for storing food. There, in a large plastic food container covered in salt, lay the body of 5-year-old Ashley. Her parents were immediately arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Liang told the investigators that from the very first day Ashley returned to them, they began to have difficulties. According to him, the child didn't even know her last name. Ashley couldn't say whether she was a boy or a girl. She had just turned 5 years old. The girl still wasn't potty trained and wore diapers. Liang complained repeatedly about how difficult it was to deal with Ashley, telling the officers conducting the interrogation that the child intentionally tried to irritate his wife. He even demonstrated the pose that Ashley would take on purpose, as he was convinced, to anger her mother. The girl would stand on her tiptoes, stretch out her arms, and pretend to play the piano. They constantly had to yell at her to stand straight and keep her hands at her sides. The police reviewed the phone records of the Jao couple and found that while Ashley was with her grandmother, neither her mother nor her father had almost ever called New York to check on how their daughter was doing. However, after the child returned, Liang's mother and sister frequently called him, asking about Ashley. According to him, there was a lot of pressure on Meng Meng, as her mother-in-law constantly criticized her parenting and accused her of being a bad mother. At the beginning of the interrogation, Liang started by saying that his wife was a wonderful woman, and that he wouldn't have married her if that weren't the case. He also claimed that Meng Meng had never once raised a hand against their older daughter, Jojo. However, just a month after Ashley returned to them, Meng Meng began hitting their younger daughter. If Ashley didn't obey, her mother would twist her arm and slap her hard across the face. During the interrogation, Liang repeatedly said that he had intended to call someone, but that Ashley had so many bruises that he was afraid they would take away their older daughter as well, which would mean losing everything they had worked so hard for over the past 6 years. But what could a small child do to deserve being killed? On the morning of January 9th, Liang took Jojo to school, and when he returned home around 9 a.m., he saw Meng Meng beating Ashley. It turned out that the final straw for Meng Meng was that the girl had taken off her dirty diaper. The diaper had been on her all night and was soiled. Ashley had removed it, causing its contents to spill onto the floor. This is when her mother lost control. She began punching the girl in the head with her fists. Liang watched as his wife slammed the child's head onto the floor twice with force. He said that right after, Ashley seemed a bit dazed, but the girl didn't even cry. So Liang assumed she was fine. However, within minutes, the little girl began to breathe heavily. Something gurgled in her throat, and then she started vomiting. Her parents carried her to the bathroom, where Ashley's condition worsened. The vomiting wouldn't stop. They rinsed her off in the shower and dressed her in clean clothes. It was only then, according to Liang, that he noticed the little girl was no longer breathing. Liang said he performed CPR on his daughter for about half an hour, but the girl never regained consciousness. By 10 a.m., the Jao couple was already opening the restaurant. They arrived on time because their regular customers were already waiting. Liang carried a large sports bag with him, inside of which was Ashley's lifeless body. The parents placed their daughter's dead body on a couch in the back room, arranging it to look like she was just sleeping. This was done so that when Jojo returned from school, she would see Ashley and think she was asleep. This way, Jojo wouldn't have to lie to the police, as children are not good at lying. Jojo loved her little sister and always stood up for her when she saw their mother get angry. Liang said he wanted to call the police right away and take the blame for Ashley's death. But Meng Meng pointed out that the police would see the bruises on the girl's body and would question why the mother had not reacted to them. Liang said that as soon as Jojo returned from school and looked in the back room to check on her sleeping sister, he discreetly moved Ashley's body, placed it in a food container filled with salt, and hid it in a crack in the wall. Liang admitted that he had no idea so many people would get involved in the search for Ashley. He was convinced that everyone would soon forget about the incident, and they would just become another family whose child had gone missing. When asked what they planned to do with their daughter's body afterward, Liang said that he and Meng Meng had considered 3 options, none of which they ultimately deemed viable. They considered throwing the body into the ocean but feared it might wash back ashore. They thought about burying it in the woods, but wild animals could have unearthed the grave. They even planned to burn it, but the bright flames from the fire might have been noticed by someone. So they simply left the body in a plastic container filled with salt. Throughout the entire interrogation, Liang never once referred to his deceased daughter by name, instead calling her that. Liang also mentioned that he had witnessed his wife's mental distress and had wanted to send Ashley to Meng Meng's mother in China. However, her mother was already taking care of her brother's children and couldn't take in their little daughter as well. He asked the officers to consider Meng Meng's mental state, saying that his wife needed psychiatric help, not just a regular prison sentence. He also requested that their older daughter, Jojo, be placed in the care of social services and not be given to his relatives under any circumstances. Meng Meng was also interrogated. The woman displayed absolutely no emotion regarding what had happened. "I kept doing bad things that made me angry. I couldn't control myself, and I killed her," she said. The officer conducting the interrogation later admitted that it was the hardest conversation of his life, as he looked at a mother who had killed her little daughter and couldn't comprehend how it was possible. "Your daughter is dead. I just don't understand. I see that you're not crying. You said you have nothing left. You have no tears left. Nothing left. Meng Meng, your daughter is dead." Meng Meng simply replied that she couldn't take care of everything, that she was already burdened with all the responsibilities related to the restaurant, that she only had 2 hands, not 4. She physically couldn't manage everything. In September 2017, the Jao couple went on trial, as Liang cooperated with the investigation and agreed to testify against his wife. He was sentenced to just 12 years in prison. Meng Meng received a 22-year prison sentence because her citizenship status was not fully resolved by the time her prison term would end. She will be deported back to China. Their older daughter, Jojo, was placed with a guardian who will care for her until she turns 18. As Liang insisted, this guardian is not a family member, not even a distant relative. "We examine many crimes together, but when the victims are children, it is particularly heartbreaking. In this case, the killer of Ashley was her own mother. It is difficult to comprehend that a terrified child had nowhere to turn for protection because her own parents despised her. Ashley was never seen by a child psychologist, but if we draw conclusions from the descriptions of her behavior, it's quite possible that she had autism. On the other hand, she spent most of her short life with her paternal grandmother. It's hard to judge how she was treated there." However, the fact that Liang begged the police not to place his older daughter with his own parents is quite telling. I always say, and I'm ready to repeat it again, if you don't have the most important resource for raising children, time, then you shouldn't have them. We're not robots, and when exhaustion sets in, even the most beloved people can become irritating. To have a child and then take out your frustrations on them because it's hard to manage the family business that you're investing in to support that very child, it's a vicious cycle of fear, suffering, and pain, where in the end, no one is happy. What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss it together. On July 29, 1993, in Alice, Texas, a crew of workers on Cutoff Road was conducting road work in a quiet place called Tellico. The day was blistering hot, with temperatures around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. To escape the relentless sun, the workers frequently ventured into the woods to cool off. During one such break in the afternoon, A few workers decided to explore the area. By chance, one of them noticed an object lying under a pile of leaves and sticks. As they approached, to their horror, they discovered a naked human body. The corpse was that of a girl, missing her hands and head. The scene was gruesome. Her genitals and chest had been slashed and exposed, and a large incision revealed her internal organs. The workers immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene within 10 minutes. Before starting their investigation, the police cordoned off the entire forested area to preserve any evidence that might help solve the case. While securing the area with police tape, they stumbled upon another body under a bridge just 200 meters from the first. This second victim was a boy, fully clothed and not mutilated. He had been shot twice in the head. Upon searching his pockets, police found a library card identifying him as James Brian King. Identifying the girl was much more challenging, as all distinguishing features had been destroyed. Despite the clear connection between the murders, one question puzzled the investigators. Why was one victim mutilated beyond recognition, while the other was left relatively untouched? Was this the work of one person, or several? As the investigation and search efforts continued, several police officers went to James Brian King's home to inform his family that they had found his body. The officers showed the wallet to his parents, who confirmed it belonged to Brian. It turned out Brian was only 14 years old when his body was discovered. Officers spoke with Brian's biological father, James King, and his stepmother, Donna, informing them that a female body had also been found nearby. At that moment, James and Donna broke down in tears and grief because Brian had a 13-year-old stepsister who had been missing for several days. Both Brian and his stepsister, Christina Benjamin, had been missing since July 26th. 3 days before the bodies were found, the parents had reported their children missing when they didn't return home from a walk. Brian and Christina were both still children at the time of their murder. They lived in Garrett, Texas, a small rural town in Ellis County, with Brian's father, James, and Christina's mother, Donna. Garrett was a very small town with a population of just 447 in 2000 and 800 in 2010. James King was the last person to see Brian alive. Around 11 p.m. on July 26, 1993, Brian was sleeping outside in a hammock, which was not unusual for him during the summer. James went to bed but was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of a car passing by. He looked out the window and saw a brown Subaru parked in their driveway. Next to the car stood Brian, talking to a man sitting in the driver's seat. James thought his son was probably talking to a friend and calmly went to the bathroom. A few minutes later, he looked out the window again. This time, he saw his son getting into the car and driving away. James assumed Brian had gone out with friends. However, he was still a bit worried. He paced the room for about an hour, but eventually went to bed. The next morning, James checked Christina's room and noticed her bed was made. He then checked Brian's room and found his bed made as well. The children had not slept at home and had not been in contact, which was very unusual for them. James and Donna waited a few hours before going to the police. Around 3 p.m., they filed a missing persons report. The police had not yet started the search when the bodies were found. Despite the horrifying discovery, James and Donna hoped the female body was not their daughter Christina, since the identifying features were destroyed. Meanwhile, the remaining police officers continued to search the crime scene and found very valuable evidence. Near where the female body was found, officers discovered long blonde hair tangled in a barbed wire fence. They also found several short blonde hair strands. It was later determined that the long hair belonged to Christina, while the short hair likely belonged to the killer. The amount of hair found led officers to conclude that there had been a struggle between Christina and her killer, as clumps of hair on the fence indicated she fought for her life until the end. Unfortunately, the killer still overpowered her. Brian King's clothes and shoes were sent for examination, which revealed a tiny brown fiber on the front of his shoe. This fiber did not match any fibers found on Brian's body. Experts decided to investigate this small detail further. and discovered that the fabric was used in the upholstery of Japanese cars. Shortly before his disappearance, Brian was indeed seen getting into an unknown Subaru. Police questioned several neighbors, but no one saw anything that night. However, one witness provided intriguing information, stating that on July 26th, he had spoken with Brian and Christina, who mentioned they planned to meet a guy named Jason that night. The kids had no known friends by that name, making it a challenging lead for the police to follow, as Jason is a common name. A few days later, an anonymous caller provided the police with crucial information. The caller expressed concern about a man named Jason Massie, suggesting the police should investigate him. Interestingly, the police had not yet released the name of their suspect, indicating that the caller had provided the information independently. Jason Eric Massie, who was 21 years old at the time, was born on January 7, 1973, in Ellis County, Texas. He had lived in his hometown his entire life, raised by a single mother who faced ongoing financial difficulties. Due to this, they often couldn't afford to pay rent and had to move constantly. Sometimes Jason, his sister, and his mother had to sleep on the streets or in homeless shelters. His mother was constantly on psychotropic medications, which eventually led to addiction. Jason also had a stepfather who was a drug addict and frequently abused him. There were times when, with almost no food in the house, his mother would eat the last scraps in front of the children and laugh at them. Other times, she would leave Jason in the car and spend the entire night in a bar. All these events had a negative impact on Jason's unstable psyche. He developed a disturbing pleasure in hurting animals and soon amassed a collection of skulls, which he stored in a refrigerator. At school, teachers also began to notice Jason's strange behavior. One teacher noticed that Jason had brought a book about Charles Manson to school. Charles Manson was a cult leader and serial killer. This teacher expressed concern about the books that Jason was reading. Jason simply replied that Charles Manson and Ted Bundy were his idols. They were his heroes, and he actually wanted to be like them. This was not the answer the teacher expected. Jason's words deeply troubled him, and a few days later, he tried to contact Jason's mother to express his concerns. However, the family had moved again, and the teacher was unable to reach her. When Jason was 18, his mother entered his room to clean up. She was alone in the house and stumbled upon his personal diary, which he had been keeping for 3 years. She began reading and was horrified by its contents. Jason had compiled his own list of girls he planned to kill and expressed his desire to become a serial killer. It was not just a desire, it was a goal. It was time to embark on this sacred journey, he wrote. Jason apparently wanted to make history and leave his mark. His mother was understandably very concerned. She feared not only for her son's life, but also for the lives of those around him. She immediately sought help from a psychiatrist. A state psychiatrist named Kenneth DeCleva reported that he met Jason in 1991. During his examination, he diagnosed Jason with severe psychological disturbances and concluded that he posed a threat to society. It was decided to send Jason to a psychiatric clinic for treatment. However, he was only treated there for about a week because another local psychiatrist reevaluated him and concluded that Jason was healthy, so he was released. When the anonymous call came into the police station mentioning Jason Massie, the caller also noted that the young man had a reputation as a killer. While he had never killed people, it was known that from a young age he killed cats, dogs, and other pets. Sometimes he would kidnap neighbors' pets and kill them in the most brutal ways. The caller also mentioned that Jason often talked about killing young girls, joking about it and frequently bringing up the subject, which scared those around him. However, they didn't see him as a threat because Jason had been talking about such things for years without actually committing murder. The caller provided a list of names of people close to Jason Massie. After the call, the police interviewed all of Jason's friends, and they confirmed the anonymous caller's statements. Jason indeed killed animals and joked about killing girls. They also mentioned that he kept the skulls of the animals he killed at home and was proud of his collection. Jason's friends revealed that he had recently mentioned Brian and Christina, with a particular interest in being alone with Christina. This information was enough for the police to go to Jason Massie's house and arrest him on suspicion of murder. They took him to the police station for questioning, where they showed him crime scene photos, including the decapitated and mutilated body of Christina. Jason reacted with apparent disgust, claiming the images terrified and horrified him, and he refused to look further, expressing sympathy for the poor girl who had been killed in such a horrific and inhumane way. Despite Jason's attempts to display his aversion to the photos, the police knew it was all a lie. Extracting information from him became increasingly difficult, but the detectives had several pieces of evidence from the crime scene, including a small piece of fiber from a Japanese car and short blonde hairs. Jason drove a Subaru, which they immediately checked. Officers removed the car's floor mats and sent them for examination. In the trunk, they found duct tape and a receipt from Walmart for the purchase of handcuffs, a hunting knife, and .22 caliber bullets, the same type of bullets used to kill Brian. A Walmart cashier recalled serving Jason a few days before July 26th. She found it strange that a young man was buying handcuffs, as no one had purchased them before, and she wasn't even aware they were in stock. Jason was the first person to buy them from her, and the other items, a hunting knife and bullets, also raised her suspicions. When the officers returned to the police station, they received a call from a car wash employee who reported seeing Jason Massie on July 27th, the day after the murders. Jason had meticulously cleaned his car inside and out, removing almost everything from the vehicle and scrubbing it thoroughly with cleaning agents. This behavior seemed suspicious, prompting the officers to visit the car wash. Fortunately, the car wash employees had not yet discarded the contents of the vacuum cleaner that Jason used that day. The police seized the vacuum contents and sent them to the lab. Experts discovered a large amount of long blonde hair in the debris. The hair found in the vacuum cleaner was compared to the hair found on the fence in the woods, and with Christina's hair from her hairbrush. The DNA matched. This confirmed that the body was Christina's, and she had been in Jason's car before her death. The short blonde hairs found on the fence were also compared to Jason's hair, and the DNA matched again. The fiber found on Brian's shoe matched the material of the mats in Jason's car, indicating Brian had also been in the car that night. These pieces of evidence were enough to charge Jason Massie with the murders of Christina Benjamin and Brian King. Despite the mounting evidence, Jason did not admit to the murders or reveal the location of the rest of Christina's body parts. Based on the crime scene analysis and witness statements, police reconstructed the events leading up to the murders. Jason had a friend named Christopher Nowlin, who introduced him to Christina about 10 days before the murders. Christina and Jason had hit it off, with some flirting, and Christina mentioned she would like to go out at night sometime. The day before the murders, Jason told her he would pick her up at midnight and honk for her to come out. He confided in Christopher that he wanted to kill Christina and dismember her body, but Brian was in the way. Christopher didn't take this seriously, as Jason frequently talked about killing, but never acted on it. On the night of July 26th, Jason arrived at Christina's house and honked. According to Brian's father, who saw his son get into the car, Christina was likely already in the car with Jason, as he didn't see her outside. Perhaps the young people met earlier and spent some time together driving around the city before deciding to pick up Brian. Christina likely persuaded Jason to pick up her brother. It's believed that the three of them drove around for several hours before Jason took them to a secluded spot where his behavior suddenly changed. Massie pulled out a gun and shot Brian in the head at close range. The police theorized that Jason eliminated Brian first because he was an obstacle to his more sinister plan. It was easier to get the boy out of the way. When Christina realized her life was in danger, she bolted from the car and tried to run away. At some point, she managed to distance herself from Jason, who chased after her. She fled deeper into the woods, and Jason, fearing she would escape, drew his gun and shot her in the back. When Christina fell, he returned to his car, retrieved the hunting knife and hammer he had purchased from Walmart a few days earlier, and set out to fulfill his twisted fantasy. Jason cut off her hands, head, and nipples. He eviscerated her, then mutilated her genitals. It remains unclear whether Christina was sexually assaulted, as this could not be determined. What puzzled the police most was the lack of motive. Jason had no reason to kill Christina and Brian other than to realize his sick fantasies. It seemed he did it for pleasure. For years, he had not only spoken of his intentions, but had also tortured animals in similar ways. Some believe Jason intended to rape Christina, but not kill her. Unfortunately, the Walmart receipt, hammer, and gun suggested otherwise. At the trial, the attorneys presented a box of animal skulls that police had previously found in Jason's home. It contained about 31 animal skulls. The attorneys also presented Massie's journals, one of which he called the Book of Death, where he kept a record of the animals he had tortured. In another journal, he described his desire to become America's most wanted serial killer, with plans to kill around 700 people. Jason's ex-girlfriend testified that after their breakup, he sent her threatening notes and eventually sneaked into her yard and killed her dog. He placed the dog's body on her father's car and smeared blood on the bumper. These testimonies, along with Jason's diaries and his collection of skulls, clearly indicated that he had planned not just one, but multiple murders. The tragic events might have been avoided if an accurate diagnosis had been made by a psychiatrist in the past. On October 6, 1994, it took the jury just 15 minutes to find Jason Massie guilty of murder. He was sentenced to death. One of the prosecutors remarked, "It's almost a miracle we caught him so quickly. I've met many like Jason, but never anyone so inhuman." Jason was executed by lethal injection on April 3, 2001. The parents and grandparents of the victims witnessed the execution. Before the injection took effect, Jason confessed to the murders and seemed to express remorse, attempting to console the victims' parents. He claimed that Christina did not suffer as he killed her before mutilating her body. He also revealed that the remaining parts of Christina's body were in the Trinity River. As the injection began, Jason looked at his family and quietly said, "I am so sorry." Jason Massie died without achieving his dream of becoming a world-renowned serial killer. Divers searched the Trinity River but were unable to find Christina's remains, likely carried away by the current and buried in an unknown location. Please support me by subscribing to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think about monsters like James.